It was the kind of storm that scrubs streets bare, but on the manicured lawns of the Mercer estate, it was a storm of betrayal no amount of rain could ever cleanse. At 11:47 p.m., Elena Vasquez, 7 months pregnant and clad in nothing but a silk nightgown, heard the click of the deadbolt behind her, the final metallic snap of her life splintering apart. Her husband, tech billionaire Julian Mercer, had just thrown her into the downpour. He called her a liability. He didn't realize that by morning, the liability he cast aside would become the very architect of his downfall. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of how a woman with nothing left to lose took on an empire and uncovered a deception so massive it would bring industry giants to their knees. The Mercer estate wasn't a home. It was a declaration perched atop the highest hill in the gated enclave of Highgrove Hills, New York. The mansion was a vision in glass, steel, and immaculate white marble. It had more windows than walls, all designed to look out over the Hudson Valley, the kingdom its master, Julian Mercer, had claimed. But from the inside, especially on a night like this, it felt less like a palace and more like a beautifully constructed prison. Julian Mercer, at 36, was the wonderkind of the tech world. His company, Neuron Systems, had revolutionized cybersecurity with its predictive AI, Sentinel. He was brilliant, relentless, and radiated a charm so potent it could twist the world to match his will. He moved through life with the calm assurance of a man who'd never been denied. His wife, Elena Vasquez, had always been the heart to his calculated logic. They'd met in a computer engineering seminar at NYU, long before the private jets and Forbes features. She was a prodigy too, an ethical hacker with an instinctive command of system design. In those early years, her ideas were the silent beams on which Julian built his empire. He was the face, the visionary, the closer. She was the quiet genius in the shadows. She had sacrificed a promising career to support his rise, believing their union was an unshakable stronghold. But even fortresses can morph into prisons. The storm outside was biblical. Sheets of rain hammered the glass walls, each drop like a tiny fist. Thunder rolled through the minimalist halls, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. One of silent dread. Elena, her hand resting gently on the swell of her belly where their son slept, watched Julian pace the floor. He hadn't said a single word to her in over 3 hours, not since he'd stormed back from an emergency meeting at the company's Manhattan headquarters. His face, usually composed and unreadable, was drawn tight, pale with tension. His jaw flexed with silent fury. The air between them was electric, the kind of charged stillness that could cleave metal. "Julian, please, talk to me." Elena's voice came out as a whisper, barely cutting through the howl of wind that battered the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What happened? What's wrong?" He didn't turn to face her. His back remained rigid as he stared into the storm, the cypress trees along their winding drive thrashing violently. "What's wrong?" he said, voice low and sharp as glass. "Is that everything we've built is seconds away from collapse, and it's because of you." A chill seeped into Elena's spine, colder than the storm raging outside. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because of me?" He finally turned. And in that moment, the man she had loved for a decade, the one whose eyes once held nothing but warmth, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, cold, empty, terrifying. In his hand, he held a sleek black tablet. He flung it onto the marble coffee table with a clatter that echoed like a verdict. "Our biggest rival, Dominic Carr of CipherCore, is launching a new platform next month. Janus." He spat the name like it burned his mouth. "It's a carbon copy of our Sentinel V20 prototype. Same predictive models, same counter-intrusion layers. A perfect duplicate of the most secure system we've ever built. A system," he added icily, "that only 5 people on Earth have full access to." He stepped closer. "Our head of R&D, our CTO, me, our lead programmer, Sophia Leclerc, and you." The accusation landed with suffocating weight. "Julian, no, you don't actually think." "Think what?" he barked, voice rising like the storm outside. "That my own wife, the person I trusted with everything, would sell me out?" He moved toward her, his eyes wild. "We ran a forensic sweep. The breach came from an outside connection. The IP trail's been wiped 6 ways to hell, but the first handshake, the very first connection, it traces back to a personal device. Your tablet, Elena. The one you used to sketch layouts and UI drafts." He was wrong, or someone had fed him a lie. Elena's thoughts raced in panic. She hadn't touched the Sentinel server in months. Her involvement had been in the conceptual stage, early architecture. Nothing that sensitive. "That's impossible," she said, voice cracking. "I haven't," she cried, but Julian's voice exploded over hers. "Stop lying," he roared, the sound so sharp, so raw, it made her flinch. "Dominic Carr must have paid you off. Was that it? Or was it something else?" His eyes burned through her. "Did you want me to fail? Were you always jealous?" The accusation hit her like a slap. It was monstrous, unimaginable, so far from the truth of their life together it left her speechless, like accusing her of making the sun stop rising. "Julian," she choked out, tears spilling fast and hot down her cheeks, "everything I've ever done, everything, was for you, for us." "Don't you dare use that child as a shield," he snapped, rage twisting his face into something she didn't recognize. She stepped back, one hand instinctively protectively over her belly. "That child," he said coldly, "is the only reason I haven't called the authorities already. You think the company could survive this? A pregnant wife betraying her billionaire husband? It would be the death of us." He turned and stalked toward the grand foyer. His steps were stiff, mechanical. He reached the wall panel and pressed a button. The heavy, soundproof front door hissed open, revealing nothing but darkness and slashing rain. "What are you doing?" Elena's voice was a high whisper, her pulse thudding in her ears. "Minimizing damage," Julian said flatly. "You're a liability I can't afford." He walked back to her without a pause. And what happened next happened so fast, she barely processed it. He picked up her purse from the side table, opened it, and took out her wallet, then her keys. Then he reached for her phone and pulled it from her trembling hand. "Julian, no. Please." Her voice broke as a primal fear surged through her. "You can't do this. It's pouring out there." "That's not my concern anymore," he said, his voice like steel. "You've betrayed this family and this company. Everything in this house, everything you have was paid for with Neuron money. You leave with nothing, because without me, Elena, you are nothing." He grabbed her arm. His grip was iron. She twisted, tried to pull away, but he was too strong. This was the man who once whispered dreams into her ear under starlit skies. The man who cried with her when they saw the heartbeat of their child on a monitor. Now he was someone else, a monster, and he was dragging her toward the door. "Julian, please, the baby," she sobbed, stumbling, gasping through the horror of it. "You should have thought about the baby," he said coldly, "before you committed treason." He pushed her out of the doorway. The cold hit her like a slap. Rain slammed into her bare arms and soaked through the thin silk of her nightgown, drenching her in seconds. The wind lashed her hair across her face. She turned, one hand bracing the doorframe, her face frozen in disbelief and horror. "I didn't do this," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "I swear to you, Julian, I love you. Someone is framing me." For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe even pain. But it vanished just as fast, replaced by that same impenetrable ice. He looked down at her, drenched, trembling, a ghost of the woman he once claimed to love, and said the words that would haunt her forever. "The evidence is absolute. Goodbye, Elena." Then he pulled the heavy door shut. The lock clicked into place like a bullet through the heart of the universe. She stood there shivering. For how long, she didn't know. Her nightgown clung to her skin, outlining the curve of her belly. The wind howled around the edges of the house like a chorus of mourning. She reached out, fingertips still hovering in the air where the door had been. For a fleeting moment she thought, hoped he'd open it again, that this was all some twisted mistake, that he'd come back to his senses. But only silence answered, cold, relentless, final. She was barefoot, standing on sharp gravel that bit into the soles of her feet. She had no phone, no money, no one to call. She looked up at the towering glass estate, its lights warm, golden, beautiful. Her home, her life, her love, all stolen in minutes by a lie. A lie so convincing it had transformed her husband into a stranger, a monster. Despair settled in her gut like lead. She could lie down, let the storm swallow her whole. But then, there it was, a tiny kick, a flutter inside her womb. The baby, a small, fierce reminder that she wasn't alone, that something depended on her. That this wasn't just her fight anymore. She let out a shaky, gasping sob. Then, she turned her back to the glowing house, the glass prison, and began walking. one barefoot step after another down the long, winding driveway into the darkness. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. The past was a sealed vault. The future, a terrifying abyss. And as she vanished into the rain-soaked night, she had no idea that the lie Julian so carefully constructed was about to unravel in the most public, devastating way imaginable. The storm had only begun. The mile-long driveway stretched ahead of her like a frozen wasteland, each piece of gravel sliced into her skin. The rain was relentless, like a weight trying to bury her. By the time she reached the towering iron gates at the edge of the estate, she was trembling uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from a grief so deep it felt terminal, like a sickness without cure. The world beyond the Mercer estate was little more than a blur of headlights and slick, black asphalt. She was invisible now, a ghost haunting the edges of her own shattered life. Sheer instinct, a primal need for safety, kept her feet moving. She remembered a small 24-hour cafe a few miles down the road, a quiet roadside diner where she and Julian had once stopped for coffee, laughing in a life that now felt like a faded photograph of strangers. The distance was impossible in her condition, but it was the only destination her fractured mind could summon. She'd barely gone a quarter mile when headlights slowed beside her. A beat-up old sedan, the kind you'd never see in this neighborhood of Teslas and blacked-out Bentleys. She stiffened, bracing herself to run, but her body had nothing left to give. The passenger window rolled down with a mechanical wheeze. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The voice was raspy, weathered with age, but full of concern. She looked over and saw a man, late 70s, with a face lined by time and a crown of wild white hair. He looked like someone's grandfather. Familiar, safe. "Please, don't hurt me," she stammered, her teeth chattering so hard it made her words brittle. The man's eyes widened, alarmed. "Good heavens, child, no. You're soaked to the bone and my God, you're pregnant. Get in before you catch your death." Hesitation warred with desperation, but the warmth in his eyes, it was the first kindness she had felt in hours. Sobbing with a mix of fear and fragile relief, Elena stumbled toward the door and collapsed into the seat. The interior smelled of old books and peppermint. "My name's Elias Vance," the man said gently, reaching into the back seat and pulling out a worn wool blanket. He wrapped it carefully around her shaking shoulders. "What happened to you? Where's your husband?" The word hit her like a fresh wound. He threw me out," she whispered. The shame of it flamed on her cheeks. Elias's soft expression hardened. He didn't pry, didn't press for details. He simply gave a small, knowing nod, his jaw tight with restrained anger. "Some men are fools," he muttered. "Some are monsters. Let's get you warm and safe. The rest we'll figure out later." And with that he drove, not to a hospital, not to a police station, but to a small, cluttered bungalow nestled in the quiet outskirts of northern New York. It was the complete opposite of the Mercer mansion, warm, lived in, filled with the scent of tea and old paper. Books were stacked on every available surface. Elias Vance, she would later learn, had been a constitutional law professor at Columbia, a man who had spent his career fighting for the overlooked and unheard. He made her a cup of sweet tea, found a soft, oversized sweatshirt and a pair of sweats for her to change into, and gently cleaned and bandaged the cuts on her feet with the practiced care of someone who had done this before. Paternal, patient. For the first time, Elena allowed herself to collapse, to unravel. The story came pouring out, broken sentences, hiccuped sobs, raw gasps, the accusation, the betrayal. Julian's eyes gone ice cold. Elias listened without a word, but his expression remained alert, sharp behind his glasses. When she finished, he leaned back and said quietly, "This isn't just a marital meltdown, Elena. This is a corporate execution. He didn't just kick you out. He erased you, strategically. No phone, no wallet, no access to your accounts, no identity. He made you a non-person." His words hit like a second slap of cold water. "But he thinks I betrayed him," she said helplessly. "He has evidence." "Evidence can be forged," Elias said, calm but certain. "And a man like Julian Mercer, founder of a tech company built on predictive data models and digital manipulation, knows that better than anyone. He's either orchestrating a world-class lie or he's been played." Elias looked thoughtful. "Given how he treated you, the woman carrying his child, I'm not inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. But for your sake, we must consider the possibility that he's being manipulated. By who? Elena asked, still stunned. Who would want this? Dominic Carr, of course, Elias said, lacing his fingers together. He's the obvious one to benefit, but this is too surgical, too neat. The breach traced directly to your device, it feels intimate. He fixed her with a level look. Who at Neuron Systems dislikes you, Elena? Or more importantly, who gains the most with you gone? The name came to her lips like it had been waiting. Genevieve Croft. Julian's hand-picked CTO. His prodigy. Brilliant, cold, precise. She had always spoken to Elena with distant professionalism, never warmth. There was always something clipped in her tone, something quietly dismissive. And her loyalty to Julian, it had always gone beyond admiration. With Elena gone, Genevieve would be the sole woman at his side, the inner circle, the confidante. She loves him, Elena said aloud, and the words left a bitter taste. She's always loved him. Elias nodded slowly. Classic motive, jealousy, ambition, and a rival CEO ready to pounce. A silver bullet, it's a powerful cocktail. Meanwhile, back in the glass fortress, dawn broke over Highgrove Hills, but it brought no warmth, only a harsh, accusing light. Julian Mercer stood by the window, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, untouched. He hadn't slept. The image of Elena's face, soaked, stricken, terrified, was burned behind his eyes. A part of him, a small voice screaming beneath the silence, knew he had made a catastrophic mistake, but he had buried that voice, drowned it under logic and evidence and the illusion of control. Now as the sun lit the pale marble floors, that voice was clawing its way back. Loud, unrelenting, echoing with every heartbeat. But the evidence, it had been so precise, so airtight. Genevieve had presented it with tears glistening in her eyes, shaking her head in disbelief, voice thick with sorrow. She'd said she admired Elena, that it devastated her to share the betrayal, the data logs, the server pings, her concern for him, her heartbreak. The betrayal had felt complete, irrefutable. He had acted, for the company, for the future. And yet, standing there now, he felt none of the certainty he had clung to just hours ago. The decisions he made felt less like strength and more like fear, dressed up in strategy. His thoughts shattered as his head of security buzzed through the private line. Mr. Mercer, you need to see this. Julian quickly switched the main screen to the external camera feeds, and froze. The gates of the estate were swarmed. A fleet of media vans stretched down the drive. CNN, MSNBC, local stations. Reporters pressed against the iron gates, microphones waving, cameras aimed like sniper rifles at his front door. His stomach turned to ice. How? Only two people had known, his security chief and Genevieve. He had made sure it was contained, silent, controlled. This was chaos. His phone rang. It was the PR director, panic already in her voice. Julian, what the hell is happening? My phone's exploding. News outlets are running a tip, anonymous, claiming you threw your pregnant wife out in the middle of the night, violently. There's footage, Julian. They're calling it spousal abuse. Julian felt the blood drain from his head. The floor tilted. This wasn't the story he had planned to manage. This wasn't visionary CEO averts sabotage. This was monster billionaire abuses pregnant wife. And it wasn't just public. It was viral, uncontainable. His legacy, his entire empire was being devoured in real time, pixel by pixel, frame by frame. It would infect Aura's brand like poison. Stockholders would panic. The board would revolt. Investors would flee. He hung up, his mind spinning. Who had leaked this? Elena didn't have a phone, no money, no access to anything. And it wasn't her style. She would never go public, never smear him, even after what he'd done. This was an attack. A deliberate, brutal PR assassination. Back in Elias Vance's quiet bungalow, the television glowed softly in the corner. Elena watched the live feed of her former home. Her hand slowly rose to cover her mouth. On screen, a well-known media anchor named Thea Collins stood under a black umbrella, her face grim as she spoke into the camera. This story is still developing, she began, but early reports suggest that Elena Vasquez, the wife of Neuron Systems CEO Julian Mercer, was forcibly removed from their Highgrove Hills estate late last night during the storm. What's most disturbing are allegations that Miss Vasquez, who is reportedly 7 months pregnant, was left with no phone, no transportation, and no way to call for help. We've reached out to Mr. Mercer's camp for comment and have been met with silence. For a man known to be obsessed with public image, this silence is deafening, and it paints a very, very dark picture. Elena stared at the screen, numb. It was her they were talking about. Her life. Her face. But it felt impossibly far away, like watching someone else's nightmare. "They didn't get this story from you," Elias said sharply, eyes narrowing as he studied the live broadcast. "Which means the person who framed you is the same one who leaked it." "Why?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would they do that?" "Because this isn't just about removing you," Elias said, tone serious and low. "This is a two-pronged attack. First, they eliminate you, the only person who could have spotted what was really happening inside that firewall. Second, they weaponize your disappearance to destroy Julian in the court of public opinion. They're not just after his tech. They want him ruined. Reputation, company, all of it. They've turned your suffering into a corporate killshot." Elena turned away from the screen, her gaze drifting down to her hands, resting on the swell of her stomach. Fear still clawed at her. Grief still pressed like lead in her chest, but something else stirred beneath it. A flicker of the old fire, the one that used to live in her fingertips, the one that could map a network in her sleep and crack into firewalled systems like breathing. They had taken her home, they had taken her husband's trust, they had tried to take her dignity, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated her. They forgot she wasn't just a billionaire's wife. She was the architect, and she knew exactly where all the hidden backdoors were. "Julian's trapped," she said quietly, her voice suddenly calm and sure. "He's standing in the eye of a hurricane he thinks I created. He won't listen to me." "No, he won't," Elias agreed. "I'm not going to talk to him," Elena said, her eyes locking with Elias's, clear and razor-sharp. "I'm going to find the proof. I helped build the security infrastructure of that entire company." "I know its flaws, I know its secrets," Elena whispered, her voice low but firm. "They think I'm out in the storm, broken, but they've just handed me the one thing I never had inside that glass prison, freedom. And I'm going to use it to find the truth." The rules had changed. This wasn't a marital collapse anymore. This was war. And Elena Vasquez, with nothing but a borrowed sweatshirt, a brilliant legal mind beside her, and a child growing inside her, was stepping onto the battlefield. While the media laid siege to the Mercer estate, Elena found sanctuary in the quiet, book-cluttered chaos of Elias Vance's study. It was a war room disguised as a professor's retreat, and for the next 48 hours it became her entire universe. The windows were closed, the air heavy with dust and old paper, but inside her chest something had cracked open. Focus, fierce and cold, had replaced grief. The old wool blanket Elias had wrapped around her shoulders still clung there, not just for warmth now, but as armor. Sleep was not an option. Fueled by sweet tea and a fire in her gut, she prepared to become a ghost in the very machine she helped create. "Julian's a creature of logic," she told Elias, who sat across from her, yellow legal pad in hand, scribbling everything. "The evidence against me must have been flawless, unshakable. A simple fake email wouldn't cut it. It had to be a forensic-level forgery, something that could survive a full audit." "So where do we start looking for a perfect lie?" Elias asked. "You don't look at the lie," Elena said, eyes narrowed. "You look at its shadow. Every action on a secure system leaves a trace. Even deleting those traces leaves metadata. Genevieve is brilliant, but arrogant. She'd make the forgery perfect, but she might get sloppy with the cleanup. Or she left herself a backdoor." Her voice sharpened with certainty, not hope, but instinct. The kind that lives in the bones of those who've built systems others only dream of breaking. Elias brought out an old encrypted laptop, a relic from his days consulting on federal cybersecurity cases. It was outdated, heavy, but completely untraceable. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. Her muscle memory took over. She wasn't hacking neuron systems. She didn't have to. In the earliest phases of development, she had written a set of emergency overrides, non-commercial failsafes buried deep in the source code, only meant to be used in worst-case system collapses. They were her digital fingerprints. Julian had forgotten they existed, and she had never forgotten a single keystroke. She slid past Neuron's sophisticated defenses like a ghost, disappearing into the labyrinthine server framework. "I'm in," she breathed. Code poured across the screen in a rapid scroll of characters. Her eyes stayed locked, scanning. "Now," she said, "let's find that audit." Meanwhile, Julian was living in his own private hell. The Mercer mansion felt smaller by the hour, its cold elegance turning claustrophobic. The walls were closing in. He was a prisoner of his own making, and he was watching his empire unravel on national television. His board of directors was in full-blown panic. A critical emergency meeting was called. "This is a disaster, Julian," boomed a voice from the massive conference screen in his office. It was Marcus Thorne, his oldest investor, and a man known for his singular obsession with quarterly gains. Ruthless, blunt, unforgiving. "Our stock's down 12% in 48 hours based on a rumor. Monster CEO tosses pregnant wife into the storm is not a good look for a company built on privacy, security, and trust." "It's a targeted smear campaign, Marcus," Julian replied, voice tight and brittle. "It's tied to a larger security breach. We're working on it." Genevieve Croft, seated beside him, radiated composure. Her tone was measured, confident, rehearsed. "The breach was serious, yes, but we've isolated and contained the affected infrastructure," she said, projecting a summary slide to the screen. "The press leak was an unfortunate emotional backlash. We are finalizing a statement that reframes the entire incident under a corporate espionage narrative." She said it like a script. Emotional backlash, corporate espionage, cold, calculated euphemisms that validated Julian's actions while quietly erasing Elena from the conversation. Julian shifted in his seat. Genevieve was too calm, too efficient. She had answers for every question, drafts for every statement, legal guidance, crisis modeling, projections. At first, her control had been a godsend. Now, it felt suffocating. She was always there with a fresh espresso, a legal summary, a quiet reassurance. And with every moment, she filled the empty space Elena had left behind. Meanwhile, pressure mounted from another direction. Dominic Carr, his fiercest competitor, had called, not to gloat, but to sympathize. "Julian, my friend, what a nightmare." Carr's voice oozed from the speaker, smooth and sympathetic. "To be betrayed like that? By your wife? Devastating. If there's anything I can do, support, security resources, PR muscle, you just say the word. Yes, we're rivals, but there's a code, and this is beneath it." It was so generous it immediately set off alarm bells in Julian's mind. Dominic Carr was a shark. Sharks didn't extend lifelines. They circled when they smelled blood. This was a move, a setup, a calculation. Was Carr fishing for intel, or was this the most subtle, most vicious form of gloating, offering comfort while silently claiming victory? Back in Elias Vance's bungalow, Elena's fingers paused above the keyboard. She'd found it. The internal forensic report detailing the breach. Her eyes scanned the document, and as she read, her blood turned to ice. It was a masterpiece of deception. The report laid everything out, clean, methodical, lethal. It showed an intrusion from Elena's tablet, her unique device ID matching perfectly. Logs of data packets transferring to an offshore server, untraceable, concise, surgical, damning. "She's better than I thought," Elena muttered, a strange twist of grudging respect lacing the disgust in her voice. "Can you disprove it?" Elias asked, leaning forward, scanning the document over her shoulder. "I can't disprove this," Elena said, tapping the main report. "It's airtight, a sealed narrative, but I can look at the noise around it, server logs, access credentials, room temperature, the maintenance metadata. People who build perfect lies always forget the periphery." For hours she combed through terabytes of routine activity, mundane, meaningless logs, until she saw it. A blip, a microscopic anomaly, a digital needle in a haystack. 2:14 a.m., 3 weeks ago, the exact time the breach supposedly occurred from her tablet. A Level 3 diagnostic had been run on the primary server bay. It was a high-level maintenance function, one that temporarily disabled security redundancies. Standard. But this one hadn't been triggered automatically. It had been initiated manually. Her fingers moved fast, heart racing. Who authorized that diagnostic? She pulled the credential logs. One name. One authorization code. Genevieve Croft. Elias sat up straighter, eyes sharp. She was live on the system when the breach happened. "It's more than that," Helena said, her voice rising. "This diagnostic, it's a smokescreen. While it's running, someone with her access could have spoofed a device on the local network. She could have made the system think it was my tablet initiating the transfer when she was sending the files from hers. It wasn't proof. It didn't show the hand pulling the trigger, but it showed the gun was in her grasp. A jury would call it circumstantial. But to Alina, it was the glint of light off a gun barrel in the dark. "We need more," Elias said, his voice gentle but firm. "A real trail. Right now it's just motive and opportunity." "I know," Elena whispered, leaning back in the chair, rubbing at her strained eyes. The baby kicked. A strong, steady thump. It grounded her, reminded her why she had to keep going. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She thought about Genevieve, her ambition, her precision, her worshipful fixation on Julian, and her relationship with the outside world. Had she acted alone, or was Dominic Carr more than just a conveniently sympathetic rival? "Elias," Elena said suddenly, her voice sharp with clarity. "Forget neuron servers. I've been looking in the wrong place. The proof won't be in Julian's systems, it'll be in Dominic's, Cartech. Their security will be ironclad," Elias warned. "Exactly," Elena said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "And what's the one thing every fortress builder does?" She didn't wait for him to answer. "They admire their own walls." She opened a new window on the old laptop, but instead of navigating to Cartech's corporate site or secure platforms, she pulled up a niche online forum, a known watering hole for elite cybersecurity engineers. A place where the best minds in data defense anonymously bragged about their innovations. She started searching keywords tied to Janus, Dominic's much-hyped new platform. It was a long shot, a reckless theory, built off psychology more than code. But then, there it was. A post dated 2 weeks prior. The user's handle, Daedalus7. The content was vague but arrogant. It described a breakthrough acquisition method, something rooted in social engineering, capable of mimicking internal hardware on a secure network. The terminology was cryptic, but it lined up exactly with what Elena had just uncovered inside Neuron Systems. It was a victory lap, a digital brag. Her heart pounded as she read the final line. "The Icarus we were targeting never even saw the sun coming. He was too busy staring at his own reflection." Icarus, the nickname Dominic Carr had privately used for Julian for years. Mocking, condescending, but it wasn't the reference that froze Elena in place. It was the avatar. A tiny stylized image beside the user's name. A minimalist black rook. Elena zoomed in, her hands trembling. 3 years ago, at a company retreat, Julian had gifted each of his top executives a custom laptop skin. For Genevieve, a lifelong chess fanatic, it had been a stark, matte design featuring a single black rook. It was her calling card. Her symbol. She had posted this, Genevieve Croft, using a handle she thought was anonymous, hiding behind an image she thought no one would remember. "Elias," Elena whispered, barely able to speak. "I've got her." The discovery of the Daedalus7 post hit like lightning in the pitch-black room of their investigation. It was the missing link, the bridge between corporate espionage and personal betrayal. It didn't just suggest Genevieve had orchestrated the breach. It connected her directly to Dominic Carr. The Icarus reference was deliberate, a mocking, strategic taunt aimed squarely at Julian. And the Black Rook avatar? That was Genevieve's signature, left behind in a moment of sheer arrogance. "This is it," Elias said, voice tight with contained excitement as he studied the screenshot Elena had captured. "This is the weapon." "But a weapon," he added, "is only as powerful as the person who wields it." "How do we use this, Elena? Quiet word with Julian? A lawyer's letter?" Elena stared at the image, the Black Rook, the digital confession. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. And war didn't end with whispers. Legal battles dragged on for months, years, drowning truth in paperwork while the lie that wrecked her life stayed public fact. "No," Elena said quietly, "they made the betrayal public. The vindication has to be just as public. It has to be fast, and it has to be devastating." She stood. "Julian's PR team has scheduled a press conference tomorrow afternoon," she said, her voice steel. "He's going to go live, televised, and lay out his story. Frame the breach as corporate espionage, position himself as the betrayed husband, and paint me as, what? A fool? A willing accomplice? A liability? He's going to take control of the narrative. And you're going to crash the party," Elias said, a slow smile spreading. "I'm going to return the narrative to the truth." Elena corrected. "But we can't just dump this on a tabloid site. It has to come from a credible source, a voice people trust." Immediately, one name came to her. Thea Collins, the sharp, respected anchor from the cable news network, CNN. Her coverage of the scandal had been measured. Fair. She hadn't sensationalized Elena's suffering. She'd asked questions, the right ones. Elias reached out through old contacts from his Columbia days. Within hours, they had a private email address for Collins. Elena wrote the message herself. Direct, professional, unapologetically clear. Subject: evidence regarding the Neuron Systems security breach. Miss Collins, you've been reporting on the situation involving me and my husband Julian Mercer. The official story you are about to hear at tomorrow's press conference is false. The truth is a coordinated conspiracy between Neuron Systems CTO, Genevieve Croft, and Cartech CEO, Dominic Carr, meant to steal proprietary technology and destroy Julian's company. Attached, you'll find a dossier with time-stamped verifiable evidence, including internal server logs and a public forum post by one of the perpetrators. I'm giving this to you exclusively. Elena Vasquez. All I ask is that you verify the authenticity, Elena wrote, and that you break the story at exactly 2:15 p.m. Pacific Time tomorrow. Not a minute before, not a minute after. She signed it. Elena Vasquez. She attached the encrypted file. It included everything: screenshots, server logs, access credentials, timestamps, a step-by-step breakdown of how the forgery had been constructed. Her fingers hovered a second longer over the send key, her breath shallow. She wasn't just exposing a crime, she was detonating a truth bomb that could level everything. Then they sent it and wiped the laptop clean. Nothing left but silence. And a stranger's promise to ignite the fuse. The following day, the executive conference hall at Neuron Systems was packed to suffocation. Cameras stood shoulder to shoulder, microphones pointed like bayonets. The air was electric, thick with anticipation. Julian Mercer stepped up to the podium, flanked by Genevieve Croft and a wall of corporate attorneys. He looked exhausted, older. His tailored suit hung looser, his skin pale beneath the lighting. His eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, he looked completely, utterly lost. He cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady, amplified by a dozen mics. "I know there's been an overwhelming amount of speculation and frankly abhorrent rumor-mongering over the past several days. Today I'm here to set the record straight." He launched into the narrative, measured, well-rehearsed. He spoke of a sophisticated breach, of internal betrayal, of intellectual theft that struck at the very foundation of his company's mission. He never mentioned Elena by name, just vague references, a compromised internal source, a deeply painful personal element. But every word he uttered weighed like lead in his chest. He knew this script, knew it too well. Yet each sentence felt like it belonged to someone else, someone still convinced they held the moral high ground. It was a performance, strong, dignified, tinted with a whisper of heartbreak. Genevieve stood beside him, her expression the perfect storm of loyal lieutenant and emotional pillar, unshakable, serene. But at exactly 2:15 p.m., a stir began in the back of the room. Low at first, a murmur, then it spread. Phones lit up, thumbs moved, eyes widened. Thea Collins, near the front, touched her earpiece. Her producer was in her ear. She didn't flinch, didn't react, but her gaze snapped to Genevieve Croft. A journalist from a major tech outlet stood abruptly, cutting Julian off mid-answer. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice loud and clear, "we're receiving a breaking news alert from CNN. It alleges that the breach didn't come from outside Neuron Systems," the reporter continued, "but that it was orchestrated internally by your CTO, Ms. Genevieve Croft, in collusion with Dominic Carr of Cartech. Can you comment on that?" The room detonated. Julian Mercer stood frozen, his face confused, stunned, drained of color. That's absurd." He stammered. "Our forensic audit was conclusive. This can't be real. Where is this coming from?" Genevieve went stiff. Every ounce of color vanished from her face. Her eyes darted, rapid, calculating, desperate. A cornered animal looking for an escape route. Thea Collins lifted her microphone. Her voice, calm and composed, cut clean through the noise. "Miss Croft," she said, her gaze locked and unrelenting, "my network has just published screenshots from a cybersecurity forum. The posts are from a user named Daedalus7, who outlines a hardware impersonation attack, identical to the one Neuron Systems claims to have suffered. The user's avatar is a black rook, identical to the design on your company-issued laptop. And in one post, the user refers to Mr. Mercer by the codename Icarus, a nickname known only within your inner executive circle. Can you explain this?" Every camera turned, every lens found Genevieve Croft. The The snapping of shutters sounded like machine gun fire. She opened her mouth. No words came out. Her legendary composure, gone. Her confidence, shattered. Her silence was deafening. The entire room held its breath, suspended in that single brutal moment where truth and performance collided. The persona she had so carefully built, flawless, brilliant, indispensable, was unraveling in real time. Julian turned to her. He stared at her pale, panicked face, then to the reporter's phone screen, zoomed in on the stylized black rook. He had seen that image hundreds of times. He had commissioned it for her. And suddenly, everything clicked. The evidence that was too perfect. Genevieve's over-eager calm, her suffocating presence, her obsessive reassurances, Dominic Carr's carefully timed sympathy. It had all been an illusion, a perfect trap. He hadn't been betrayed by Elena. He had been used, manipulated, turned into a weapon against the one person who had never betrayed him. And in his arrogance, in his blindness, he had done something he could never undo. He saw Elena's face in his memory. Tears, pleading, fear. As he threw her into the storm, the room dissolved around him, just the echo of her voice in his head and the hollow ache of what he had destroyed. The shame hit him like a freight train, heavy and inescapable. "Genevieve," he whispered, his voice breaking. Genevieve finally cracked. A strangled sob escaped her throat. She looked at Julian, her face a grotesque twist of devotion and panic. "I did it for you, Julian," she wailed, voice rising to a piercing scream. "She didn't deserve you. She was holding you back. I could help you build an empire. We could have ruled everything together." Her confession, raw, manic, unhinged, filled the room. Unhinged. The word echoed in the stunned silence like a bell signaling the end. There was no need for further confirmation. The story was no longer about a data breach. It was about obsession, a spurned lover, a corporate betrayal, and a devastating injustice. Security moved in, calm, firm, escorting the sobbing Genevieve Croft from the room. Lawyers shouted. Reporters scrambled, barking into phones, pushing breaking news alerts into the world. But Julian Mercer stood motionless beneath the brutal glare of the lights. He couldn't hear them, couldn't see them. All he saw was the ruin. He had saved his company, at the price of annihilating his life. He had thrown away his heart to protect his empire, only to discover he had gifted the keys to his enemies and locked himself inside. He stumbled from the podium, shoving past his legal team. He had to find her. He had to find Elena. But even as he fled the chaos of his own making, one horrifying thought kept ringing in his ears. Even if I find her, how could she ever forgive me? The fallout was instant and catastrophic. The live-streamed collapse of Genevieve Croft became the biggest story in tech and far beyond. Neuron Gate, they called it. Within hours, Cartech's board suspended Dominic Carr pending internal investigation. His once bulletproof empire began to crumble at the foundations. Neuron Systems stock plunged, then stabilized, as the narrative shifted. Not a corrupt CEO, but a company under assault. But for Julian Mercer, the headlines meant nothing. The court of public opinion had moved on. His torment was private and endless. He was the man who had cast his pregnant wife into the rain based on a lie spun by an envious subordinate and a Machiavellian competitor. He wasn't a visionary anymore. He was a fool, a broken man. His first instinct was simple, find Elena, but she had vanished. Not at her parents' house, not with friends. His investigators, world-class, turned up nothing. It was as if she'd been wiped off the planet. Until he remembered a name. An old law professor she had spoken about with reverence. Elias Vance. It took less than a day to trace him. A modest bungalow in Palo Alto. But as Julian stepped out of his sleek black car and approached the front door, the quiet house felt more intimidating than any boardroom he'd ever walked into. He knocked once. Then again. His heart thundered in his chest. The door creaked open. Elias Vance stood there, gaze unwavering. He looked Julian Mercer up and down, his expression pure and unfiltered contempt. "She is not a problem to be solved with your money, Mr. Mercer," Elias said, voice low, each word sharp as glass. "She is a human being, one you tried to break." "Please," Julian choked, all arrogance stripped from him. No CEO, no billionaire, just a desperate, broken man. "I need to see her. I need to apologize." Elias studied him for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then he stepped aside. "Elena," he called gently into the house. "You have a visitor. It's your decision." She appeared from the study. Different. The fear, still faint in her eyes, had been eclipsed by something stronger. Resolve. Her hand rested on her belly, not protectively, but as a declaration. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman reborn, not just from betrayal, but from the ashes of everything she once loved. Seeing her whole present unbroken was a relief and a punishment for Julian all at once. He had tried to destroy her, and yet here she stood. "Alina," he began, stepping forward. His voice wavered, raw with remorse. "There are no words. Sorry is an insult. What I did was monstrous, inexcusable. I was blind, arrogant, and I believed a lie because that was easier than trusting my own heart. I let them turn me into a weapon, against you, against our family." Tears spilled freely down his cheeks. Each word trembled with the weight of betrayal. Every admission a stone dropped in the chasm between them. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness. Please, come home." He looked into her eyes, pleading, bracing for rage, hoping for something, anything, of the love they once shared. But Elena was quiet. Her gaze never wavered. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, devoid of the hatred he knew he deserved. "You talk about home, Julian," she said, "but that glass house was never my home. It was yours. I was just a beautiful object you kept inside it." Her words landed like frost across his chest, sharp, cold, final. "The woman you threw out into the rain, she doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed her, and I'm not going to mourn her. Because the woman who emerged from that storm is stronger than she's ever been." She inhaled slowly. "You say you were blind, but you chose not to see. You say you were a weapon, but you chose to pull the trigger." "It wasn't the lie, Julian," Elena said, her voice low. "It was that you were capable of believing it. That somewhere inside you, you didn't see me as your partner, but as a liability. That's not a flaw in me. That's a flaw in you." She stepped closer, but not too close, just outside his reach. "I will not deny you your son," she said. "It was mercy and judgment in equal measure. You will be in his life. You will provide for him. You'll have the chance to be a father. But you will not have the chance to be my husband again. You didn't just break my heart, Julian. You broke my trust. And hearts, they can heal. But trust shattered like that, never goes back to whole." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The finality was unmistakable. Each word was a seal, closing a chapter. Not in anger, but in absolute clarity. Julian stood frozen, the truth hitting him harder than any press headline or corporate fallout ever had. He hadn't come here to win. He'd come for a second chance. And instead he'd been handed something far heavier: consequences. He would be a father, but not a partner. He would see his son, but never as part of a family. Just across a gulf, a chasm he had carved with his own hands. A silence stretched between them, not of tension, but of truth laid bare. He nodded, one jagged movement, and turned away, unable to speak past the grief in his throat. He had lost, not to Dominic Carr or Genevieve Croft, but to the weight of his own fatal flaws. Elena watched him go, her face unreadable. She didn't follow. She stayed in the warm, cluttered house among books, quiet, and second chances. She had her own path now. Weeks later, she filed for divorce. Quietly. The settlement was historic, one of the largest in California. But she took only a fraction of what was offered, just enough to build a new life for her and her son on her own terms. She used the rest to start a foundation, one dedicated to women in tech, women silenced, pushed out, or robbed of credit by powerful men. She was no longer someone's wife. She was a force. She was an architect again, not of code, but of rebirth. Julian Mercer, the former wonder boy of Silicon Valley, kept his empire, but the light in his eyes never returned. He lived in his glass mansion, surrounded by luxury and legacy, but utterly alone. He had won his war, but lost everything that ever mattered. He had kept his kingdom, and lost his soul. A ghost in a house that could never again be a home. In the end, this wasn't a story about a billionaire's fall. It was a story about a woman's rise. Elena Vasquez walked into that storm with nothing, and came out of it with everything: her strength, her purpose, her freedom. She became her own rescue, her own revolution. She proved that the greatest empires aren't built from glass and steel. They're built from integrity and truth. Julian kept his castle, but Elena reclaimed her power. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you are, something in this story must have stirred your heart. And if it did, then let's take a moment just you and me, to sit with what it gave us. This wasn't just about betrayal or scandal. It was about what happens when someone is thrown away and chooses not just to survive, but to rise. Elena walked into that storm with nothing. No shelter, no voice, no proof. And yet she walked out with power. And not the kind you measure in headlines or stock prices. I'm talking about real power, the kind that comes from reclaiming your voice when others try to silence it. Her journey reminds us of something vital. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means growing so strong that the pain no longer defines you. As writer Haruki Murakami once said, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about. Elena's strength came not from vengeance, but from clarity. From standing tall in a world that wanted her broken. From turning silence into justice, grief into action, and betrayal into legacy. And that's what we're all capable of, when we stop trying to go back to who we were, and instead grow into who we're meant to be. So if you've ever been betrayed, forgotten, underestimated, if you've ever stood in the rain, holding your own heart together, remember Elena. Remember that sometimes, storms don't just destroy, sometimes they set us free. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need this reminder today. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're just getting started. We'll be here, telling the stories that matter. Thank you for watching, and thank you for staying.